as we begin a new year. I'm sure all of us here have a desire to have a more successful year. Well, what does that mean? What does that entail? What do you mean by success? When you hear most of these New Year's resolutions, you ever notice that most of them are physical? More money, better job, more financial security. That says something about us. Why can't we think in a more spiritual way? In Romans 8, verse number 4 through 6, now that we are Christians, we are told that we are to walk after the Spirit, not after the flesh. For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. But they that are after the Spirit do mind the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death. To be spiritually minded is life and peace. That's what we should aim for. The spiritual things. Place our minds on things that are spiritual. Those that do not have God, and some who claim to have Him, only think on the physical things. That's what he's saying in verse 5. They put their minds, they settled their minds. Their minds are determined on the things of the flesh. But they that are of the Spirit, their minds are settled on the things of the Spirit. Spiritual things. And the only place I know to find the things of the Spirit is the Bible. In Colossians 3, verse number 2, Paul said, set your affections on things above, not on things on the earth. The word affections in the King James translation, Colossians 3:2, means the center of the mind, the center of the intellect. Our minds are to be placed on spiritual things. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul says the things that you can see are temporal. The things you cannot see are eternal. That's where our minds need to be set. What does it mean to have a more successful year? What do you mean by success? The way to really have a more successful year is to get nearer to God. That's the real measure of success. James 4, 7 and 8. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and He will draw nigh unto thee. But how do you draw nearer to God? Surely that's what all of us desire. Surely that's what all of us want in our Christian lives, is to be nearer to God. I mean, what's the point if that's not our point? But how do you draw nearer to God? no matter how do you look at it, we are fleshly beings. Zechariah 12:1 says, God put a spirit within us, formed a spirit within us, but that spirit is enclosed in a fleshly body. We're fleshly beings. How can a fleshly being be closer to an infinite spirit? How can that happen? The book of James is one of the most practical books in all the Bible. And all through his book, James is going to tell us how to get closer to God. How do I get closer to God? James is going to tell us in every chapter. If you have your Bibles tonight, open to the book of James. James 1 verse 12. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation. For when he has tried, he shall receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to them that love him. We're all going to be tested. We're all going to be tempted. But blessed is the man who endures that temptation. That makes that individual stronger. And as that individual gets stronger through the years, they draw closer to God. Sin is ever among us. It's all around us. We can't escape it. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation. Verse 27. Pure religion and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. How do we draw near to God? By doing what is good, by doing what is loving, by doing what is needed. In the first century and even in the Old Testament, the orphan and widows of that society were in very destitute conditions. Often they died. Often they died. Didn't have Social Security. Didn't have a government that took care of you from the cradle to the grave, like some want our country to do. And many of these people actually died from physical need. The widow who died, it wasn't like she could just go down to Walmart and get a job. Often when her husband died, she had no means of physical support. So the church is to practice pure religion. And that word visit in James 1:27 doesn't mean to go by and talk about the weather. That means to see about a person's needs, to see what they're needing. That's what the church is to be doing, is to help those among us who need that type of assistance. So doing good works in the church helps us to be closer to God. 1 Corinthians 15:58. Be you steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Put you closer to God. Ephesians 2:10 says we are God's workmanship which God has before ordained that we should walk in them. Walking in good works as God's people helps us to be more like the Lord, helps us to be closer to God. Chapter 2 gives us a thorough discussion of faith and works. And look at the conclusion, the last verse of chapter 2. As the body, apart from the Spirit, is dead, so faith without works is dead. Now, how can you have a dead faith and be close to God? Stronger faith makes us closer to God. And a faith that is dead, a faith that does not work, is a dead faith. He said, just like a body without the Spirit is dead, so if you have faith and no action to go along with that faith, your faith is dead. Active, growing faith. People that just say, oh, I believe in God and I believe in the church and I believe this, 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 and this, and they got their little checklist that assures you that you're sound. You can live like the devil, but as long as you check off the list, then you are sound. You can be as arrogant and ugly as you want to be, just so you go down the list and get it all right. Well, that's not the Bible. A sound person in the Bible not only believes the right doctrine, but they're not arrogant and proud, and they love other people, and they help other people. They're compassionate, they're sympathetic. That's the point of James 1:27. Those who are in need, God's people are to assist them. Our only course of action is not to spout out this list and be sure every one of you believes this little list that we have concocted. But soundness also includes compassion. How come that's never in the list? How come you never see that in a list of requirements? That says something about us, doesn't it? To be near to God, you must have a heart of compassion. And you must care about those who are in need. And you must do what is in your power to help those people. That is getting closer to God. And that is faith that has works in James 2:26. In James 3:16, he tells us something that's so vitally important for the church. Where envy and strife is found, there is confusion and every evil work. You know, you can be envious over many things. Not just money. People's homes, people's cars, people's clothes, people's wives, people's husbands. You can be envious over anything. And when we become envious, when we allow that to creep into our lives, and the devil's always trying to get it in there. He says, where there is envy and strife. You find that among the people of God, where there is strife and contention and dissatisfaction. What do you find? James 3:16. You find confusion and every evil work. And I've noticed through the years when a congregation has strife and people are envious of one another, all kind of other sins filter in too. So how do we be nearer to God? We stay away from envy. You want to be nearer to God? Just stay away from strife. I tell you what, I'm not going to be around people like that want strife and are going to demand their way. I'm not going to be around it. Because that makes me also have negative attitudes toward everything. In chapter 4, verse 7, resist the devil. That's how to be nearer to God. Resist him. 1 Peter 5, 8 and 9 says he goes about this world as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him and he will flee from you. But he always comes back. So we have to continually resist him, not just one time. 1 Peter 5 verse 9 says, resist him steadfast in the faith. Draw near to God, and he'll draw near to you. Chapter 4, verse 11. What's he say to brethren? How do you draw near to God? Speak not evil one of another. When we say evil things about each other, that doesn't make us nearer to God or each other. That makes us further away from God. So when you hear someone always running people down, they're not near to God. I don't care who they are. They're not nearer to God. If all they can find is negative things about people, they're not nearer to God. Speak not evil one of another. I know the argument, well, it's true. Does it need to be said? Is it really necessary? Does it build people up? So to draw nearer to God, I got to watch my tongue and not speak evil of my brethren. James 4, verse 11. James 4, verse 10. How do I draw near to God? Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord. He'll lift you up. Submission. Bowing my knee before the God of the universe, offering Him my life, my thoughts, my existence. Chapter 5, verse 16. Confess your faults one to another. That's how close brethren should be. This doesn't only have to be publicly. This helps us draw nearer to God. And then what's he say? The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. How do you draw nearer to God? Improve your prayer life. In Luke 11 verse 1, when the disciples saw Jesus pray, they were so impressed they went to him and says, Lord, teach us to pray. In Luke 18 and 1, Jesus said, men ought always to pray. In 1 Thessalonians 5:17, Paul said, pray without ceasing. You want to be nearer to God? Improve your prayer life. You'll find many in the Bible, the way they improve their prayer life, they picked a specific time and place to pray every day. Now, if you just say, I'm going to improve my prayer life, guess what? You're not going to do it. You've got to pick a specific time and place that you're going to take for God, sit down and pray to your God during those times. And then all through the day. Improve your prayer life. James 1:21. Receive with meekness the engrafted, implanted word, which is able to save your soul. That's how I draw nearer to God. When I find out I'm wrong, some people are never wrong. You can't tell them. They can't take any type of idea that they even could be wrong. That's not drawing near to God. When I find out that I'm wrong, what do? Get defensive? Get mad? Receive with meekness this word that's been implanted in your heart. Receive it with humility. How does a person draw near to God? By receiving this word and realizing if they have never obeyed the gospel, they're lost. They obey that gospel, turn away from their sins, and are baptized, and they begin the process of growing nearer to God. But let me tell you something, brethren, that's just the beginning. That's not the end of it. That doesn't mean you're okay. That's when you're born again. That's when you begin to live for God. You can do that right now.